The champagne tasted like liquid regret, and I should have known that was a warning sign. But there I was, Daniel Proctor, insurance fraud investigator extraordinaire, standing in a ballroom that cost more per night than I made in a month, watching my wife Tessa work the room like she owned it. Which, knowing her recent spending habits, she probably thought she did. Danny, stop looking like someone died, Tessa hissed as she glided past me in a dress that cost more than my car payment. This is important for my career. My career involved catching people who lied for money. Hers involved asking rich people for money, while lying about how it would be spent. The irony wasn't lost on me, even if it was lost on her. The Chicago Children's Foundation annual gala was in full swing, complete with a live jazz band that probably charged more per song than most people made in a day. Donors in $1,000 suits mingled with board members wearing jewelry that could fund a small country's education budget. And there was my wife, 35 years old and gorgeous enough to make men forget they had wives, working her magic on every checkbook in the room. Daniel! A voice like silk and whiskey called from behind me. I turned to see Vivian Harper, Tessa's younger sister, approaching in a black dress that should have been illegal in several states. Where Tessa was all sharp angles and calculated beauty, Viv was curves and natural elegance. She moved like she had a secret, which, knowing Viv, she probably did. Viv, you look, I started, like I'm about to cause trouble? She smiled, and I felt something shift in my chest. Good. That's exactly what I was going for. Before I could ask what she meant, the lights dimmed and Tessa's voice filled the room through the sound system. She stood on the small stage, microphone in hand, looking every inch the successful charity executive she pretended to be. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for being here tonight, she began, her voice carrying that practiced warmth she used when she wanted something. Your generosity continues to change children's lives every single day. I'd heard this speech before. Hell, I'd helped her practice it. But something felt different tonight. Tessa's smile seemed sharper, more predatory. Her eyes found mine across the room, and for a moment, I saw something cold there. Before we continue with tonight's program, she said, her voice taking on an edge that made my stomach clench, I have a personal announcement to make. The room fell silent. Even the waitstaff stopped moving. Marriage is about partnership, about supporting each other's dreams, Tessa continued, and I felt the blood drain from my face. But sometimes people grow apart. Sometimes you realize you've been settling for less than you deserve. Oh, hell. She wasn't about to do what I thought she was about to do. Not here. Not in front of 300 of Chicago's elite. So tonight, I'm declaring my independence, she said, raising her champagne glass. From now on, I'm single. Go find someone, Dan. The silence that followed was deafening. 300 pairs of eyes turned to look at me, standing there in my off-the-rack suit, holding a glass of champagne that suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I should have been devastated. I should have been humiliated. Instead, I found myself thinking about the credit card statements I'd been finding, the late-night phone calls she thought I didn't notice, the way she'd been working late every night for the past 3 months. Do I at least get the car? I called out, raising my own glass. A few people chuckled nervously. That's when Viv stepped up beside me, her arm sliding around my waist, with the confidence of someone who'd been planning this moment. Awesome, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom. Then I'm taking him. If the silence before had been deafening, this was apocalyptic. Tessa's face went through several shades of white before settling on a sickly green. That's not what I meant, Tessa stammered into the microphone, her composure cracking like ice on a spring lake. But Viv was already moving, guiding me toward the side door with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested she knew exactly what she was doing. As we walked, she leaned close enough that I could smell her perfume, something expensive and dangerous. Play along, she whispered. Trust me, you're about to need it. Before I could ask what she meant, she pulled me into a small conference room off the main ballroom. The sounds of confused murmuring filtered through the walls as she closed the door behind us. Viv, what the hell? She's been screwing Greg Sandlin for 3 months, she said, cutting me off. The charity director, your wife's boss. Ring any bells? Greg Sandlin, 46 years old, divorced, drove a vintage BMW that cost more than most people's houses. I'd met him at several charity events, always thought there was something oily about him. The kind of guy who wore expensive cologne to cover up the smell of his own bullshit. How do you... I'm a paralegal, Danny. I know how to find things people don't want found. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through what looked like screenshots. Deleted text messages recovered from cloud backup, hotel receipts, credit card statements. Your wife's been living a double life and she's been using charity funds to do it. My brain, trained by 15 years of investigating insurance fraud, immediately started processing the information. Deleted messages meant intent to hide. Hotel receipts meant documentation. Credit card statements meant a paper trail. Show me, I said. She handed me the phone and I started reading. The messages were explicit enough to make me grateful I hadn't eaten dinner yet. But it was the financial information that really caught my attention. Charges to restaurants I'd never been to, hotels I'd never stayed at, and payments to vendors I'd never heard of. Jesus, Viv, how long have you known? 2 weeks. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you. She sat down in one of the conference chairs, suddenly looking exhausted. I wanted you to see who she really was, but I didn't want to be the one to destroy your marriage. Looks like she beat you to it, I said, still scrolling through the evidence. But this isn't just adultery. These vendor payments? Viv, this looks like embezzlement. Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. I was hoping you'd notice that. Before I could respond, the door burst open and Tessa stormed in, her face flushed with anger and what looked like panic. What the hell do you think you're doing? She demanded, her eyes darting between Viv and me. Having a conversation, I said, pocketing Viv's phone, about your interesting approach to marriage counseling. Danny, you don't understand. I was trying to make a point about independence, about fucking your boss. The words came out colder than I'd intended, but I was past caring about tone. She froze, and I saw the exact moment she realized how much trouble she was in. I don't know what she told you, Tessa said, shooting a venomous look at her sister. But Viv has always been jealous of what we have. She's always wanted you. What we have? I laughed, and it came out bitter. What we have is a joint checking account that's been bleeding money for 3 months and a credit card bill that reads like a guide to Chicago's finest hotels. What we have is a marriage where one of us just announced our divorce in front of 300 people. I can explain. I'm sure you can. You always were good with explanations. I stood up, feeling something settle into place in my chest, something cold and calculating. But first, I think we should rejoin the party. After all, you made such a public announcement. It would be rude not to follow through. Tessa's eyes widened as she realized what I was suggesting. Danny, please. We can work this out. We can go to counseling. We can get divorced, I said. Tonight. In front of everyone. Just like you wanted. I walked toward the door, Viv falling into step beside me. Behind us, I could hear Tessa starting to panic. Danny, wait! You don't understand the whole situation. I paused at the door and turned back to her. You're right. I don't understand the whole situation, but I'm about to. The ballroom was buzzing with conversation when we returned, but it died down as soon as people saw us. Tessa followed a few steps behind, looking like she was walking to her own execution. I made my way to the stage, where the microphone still stood waiting. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, and I could feel hundreds of eyes tracking my movement. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system, I'd like to thank you all for witnessing my wife's Declaration of Independence tonight. It's been illuminating. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd. As some of you know, I work in insurance fraud investigation. It's taught me to recognize patterns, to spot inconsistencies, to follow paper trails. I paused, letting that sink in. It's amazing what you can learn when you start looking at the numbers. In the crowd, I spotted Greg Sandlin near the back, looking like he was trying to edge toward the exit. His face had gone pale, and there was sweat beading on his forehead, despite the air conditioning. For instance, I continued, did you know that in the past 3 months, the Chicago Children's Foundation has paid over $40,000 to vendors that don't seem to exist? Companies with no addresses, no phone numbers, no employees. The murmur that went through the crowd was different now, sharper, more focused. Now, I'm not saying anyone here has done anything wrong. I'm just saying that when my wife announced she was single tonight, it got me thinking about all sorts of independence. Financial independence, for instance. I saw Mrs. Eleanor Romer, the foundation's board president, push through the crowd toward the stage. She was a steel-haired woman in her 70s who'd built a real estate empire from nothing and had exactly zero tolerance for bullshit. Mr. Proctor, she said, her voice cutting through the murmur like a knife, are you making accusations? I'm making observations, I replied. But if the board would like to see some documentation, I'm sure my sister-in-law would be happy to share what she's found. Viv stepped forward, pulling out her phone. Mrs. Romer, I think you should see this. What happened next was like watching a controlled demolition. Mrs. Romer looked at Viv's phone, her expression growing darker with each swipe. She called over two other board members, who looked at the evidence and immediately started whispering urgently. Meanwhile, Greg had given up any pretense of casual exit and was making a beeline for the coat check. But Viv had anticipated this. She intercepted him just as he reached for his ticket, blocking his path with the kind of smile that suggested she was enjoying herself immensely. Leaving so soon, Greg? She asked, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. But the party's just getting started. I have an early morning, he stammered, trying to step around her. Oh, I bet you do. Probably have to meet with some lawyers, maybe talk to some accountants. She pulled out a folder I hadn't seen before and slammed it down on the coat check counter. Or maybe you need to figure out how to explain these bank deposits. Greg's face went from pale to gray. Several guests had stopped to watch the exchange, their phones already out and recording. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, but his voice cracked on the last word. Really? Because according to these records, you've been receiving payments from some very interesting shell companies. Companies that happen to match the vendor payments from the foundation's books. That's when Mrs. Romer's voice cut through the crowd like a blade. Ladies and gentlemen, I need everyone's attention. The ballroom fell silent again, but this time it felt different, expectant, dangerous. It has come to the board's attention that there may be some irregularities in the foundation's financial records, she announced. We will be conducting a full audit, effective immediately. She turned to look directly at Tessa, who was standing frozen near the stage like a deer in headlights. Ms. Proctor, Mr. Sandlin, you are both suspended from your positions pending investigation. Security will escort you from the premises. The crowd erupted. Phones came out, cameras flashed, and the gossip mill of Chicago high society kicked into overdrive. I watched Tessa's face crumble as the reality of her situation hit her. But I wasn't done yet. There's one more thing, I said into the microphone, and the crowd quieted again. I want everyone to know that I had no knowledge of any of this. But I do want to thank my wife for her public declaration tonight. It's given me the clarity I needed to make some declarations of my own. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recording app I'd started when Tessa first took the stage. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow morning. I'm also turning over all financial records to the appropriate authorities. And I want everyone here to know that I will be cooperating fully with any investigation. The crowd was dead silent now, hanging on every word. Marriage is supposed to be about trust, about partnership, about building something together. But it's hard to build anything on a foundation of lies. I looked directly at Tessa, who was now crying openly. So, thank you, Tessa, for setting me free, and thank you all for witnessing it. I handed the microphone back to Mrs. Romer and walked off the stage. Viv was waiting for me, and as we walked toward the exit, the crowd parted again. But this time, I could hear whispers of support, even a few people clapping. Behind us, I could hear Tessa calling my name, her voice desperate and broken. But I didn't turn around. I was done looking back. The next few days were a blur of lawyers, accountants, and federal investigators. It turned out that Viv's evidence was just the tip of the iceberg. Greg and Tessa had been running their scheme for over a year, funneling foundation money through fake vendors and splitting the proceeds. The total amount was close to $200,000. The media had a field day. Charity Scandal Rocks Chicago Elite was the headline in the Tribune. The Sun-Times went with Foundation Fracture, Love Triangle Leads to Embezzlement Charges. My personal favorite was the gossip blog that dubbed it the Gala from Hell. Tessa tried to contact me dozens of times, but I'd blocked her number and changed the locks on our apartment. Her lawyer reached out to mine, trying to negotiate some kind of settlement, but there wasn't much to negotiate. The joint accounts had been frozen as part of the federal investigation, and most of our assets were tied up in the legal proceedings. Greg, meanwhile, had hired one of Chicago's most expensive criminal defense attorneys, which only made him look more guilty. His vintage BMW was repossessed when it turned out he'd been using charity funds to make the payments. But the real satisfaction came 2 weeks later, when I ran into some of Tessa's old friends at a coffee shop near my office. "Danny!" Megan Walsh called out as I waited for my order. She'd been one of Tessa's closest friends, part of the charity circuit social group that spent their days planning fundraisers and their evenings attending them. "Megan," I said, turning to face her and her companion Louise Chen, another member of Tessa's inner circle. "We just wanted to say," Megan began, glancing nervously at Louise, "we had no idea what Tessa was doing. We're so sorry you got caught up in all this." "I appreciate that," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure I believed them. These women lived for gossip and drama. They'd known something was going on. "It's just," Louise added, "we always thought you two were so perfect together. The way she talked about you." "What way was that?" I asked. They exchanged another look, and I could see them debating how much to say. "Well," Megan said finally, "she always made it sound like you were holding her back. Like she could do so much more if she wasn't tied down to someone in your situation. My situation. Code for not rich enough for her tastes. She said you didn't understand her ambitions," Louise added. "That you were threatened by her success." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Her success? The charity work, the fundraising, all of it. She said you resented how good she was at it. I stared at them for a long moment, processing this information. Then I started to laugh. "You think this is funny?" Megan asked, looking offended. "I think it's hilarious," I said. "She was stealing money from children's charities, and she convinced you that I was the problem because I wasn't supportive enough of her criminal enterprise." Their faces went through several interesting color changes. "That's not—" "She didn't," Louise stammered. "She stole $200,000, I said, my voice getting louder. "From sick kids. And you're standing here telling me that I should have been more supportive of her ambitions?" Other customers in the coffee shop were starting to stare, but I was past caring. "Danny, please," Megan said. "People are looking." "Good. Let them look. Let them hear about how Tessa's friends think I'm the villain in this story because I wasn't rich enough or connected enough or whatever enough for her." "That's not what we meant," Louise said weakly. "No? Then what did you mean? Because it sounds to me like you're saying I should have been more understanding about my wife fucking her boss and embezzling charity funds." They both took a step back, their faces flushed with embarrassment. "We should go," Megan muttered. "Yeah, you should," I agreed. "And the next time you see Tessa at her arraignment, you can tell her that her ex-husband is doing just fine. Better than fine, actually." They hurried out of the coffee shop, leaving me standing there with my heart pounding and my hands shaking with adrenaline. The other customers were definitely staring now, but I found I didn't care. In fact, I felt better than I had in months. My phone buzzed with a text from Viv. "Coffee shop confrontation made the gossip blogs. You're becoming quite the celebrity." I texted back, "Good, let them talk." The federal case moved quickly. With Viv's evidence and my cooperation, the prosecutors had everything they needed to build an airtight case. Greg took a plea deal and got 3 years in federal prison. Tessa, faced with overwhelming evidence and a public that had turned completely against her, also pled guilty. The judge sentenced her to 18 months in federal prison and ordered her to pay full restitution. Her lawyer tried to argue for house arrest, citing her previously clean record and her cooperation with the investigation, but the judge wasn't having it. The defendants violated the trust of donors who believed they were helping children in need, he said during sentencing. This was not a crime of passion or desperation, but a calculated scheme to defraud a charitable organization for personal gain. I wasn't there for the sentencing, but Viv was. She texted me updates throughout the hearing. Tessa crying. Greg's lawyer making excuses. Judge not buying it. The final text came an hour later. Justice served. Drinks tonight? I met her at a bar near my office, a dive place that served good burgers and didn't care if you weren't wearing designer clothes. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner booth with 2 beers waiting. So, she said as I sat down, how does it feel to be vindicated? Honestly, it feels weird. I keep expecting to feel more satisfied, but mostly, I just feel tired. She nodded. That's normal. You've been running on adrenaline and anger for weeks. Now that it's over, the crash hits. What about you? Any regrets about burning down your sister's life? Viv was quiet for a long moment, turning her beer bottle in her hands. She burned down her own life, she said finally. I just documented the fire. And honestly, I'm not sure she was ever really my sister. Not the way sisters are supposed to be. What do you mean? Growing up, Tessa always had to be the center of attention. The prettiest, the smartest, the most successful. And if she wasn't, she'd find a way to tear down whoever was. She took a sip of her beer, her eyes distant. When we were teenagers, I had a boyfriend named Tommy. Sweet kid, played guitar, wanted to be a teacher. Tessa seduced him just to prove she could, then dumped him the next week. She said she was teaching me a lesson about trusting people. I felt something twist in my chest. Jesus, Viv. That was just the beginning. College applications, job interviews, dates, friends. If I had something she wanted, she'd find a way to take it. And if she couldn't take it, she'd find a way to ruin it. Why didn't you ever tell me this before? She looked at me directly, and I saw something vulnerable in her eyes. Because you loved her, or you thought you did, and I thought, I hoped maybe you'd be different. Maybe you'd be the thing that finally made her happy enough to stop. But I wasn't. No, you were just the next thing she decided to destroy. We sat in silence for a while, processing the weight of that revelation. So what now? I asked finally. Now we figure out what comes next, she said. You're free, Danny. Really free. Maybe for the first time in years. What do you want to do with that? I thought about it. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about Tessa or Greg or the investigation or the divorce proceedings. I was thinking about possibilities. I want to do something that matters, I said. Something real. Like what? I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out. She smiled, and it was the first genuinely happy expression I'd seen on her face since this whole thing started. I have no doubt you will. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new office, looking over the paperwork for my latest case. I'd left the insurance company and started my own investigation firm, specializing in financial fraud for nonprofits. Turns out, there was a lot of demand for someone who could spot the kind of scheme Tessa and Greg had been running. My first client had been Mrs. Romer, who'd hired me to audit the Chicago Children's Foundation's books and implement new oversight procedures. Word had spread quickly through the charity circuit, and now I had more work than I could handle. The irony wasn't lost on me. My wife's criminal behavior had inadvertently launched my dream career. I was reviewing a suspicious vendor payment for a homeless shelter when my assistant knocked on my door. Mr. Proctor, there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important. Before I could ask who it was, the door opened and Tessa walked in. She looked different. Thinner, older, wearing clothes that actually looked like they came from a normal store instead of a boutique. Her hair was shorter, less styled, and she wasn't wearing the expensive makeup that had been her armor for so long. Hello, Danny, she said quietly. I stared at her for a long moment, processing the fact that she was standing in my office. She'd been released from federal prison 3 months ago, but this was the first time I'd seen her since the sentencing. Tessa, you look... I searched for something neutral to say. Different. Prison will do that to you, she said with a bitter smile. Can we talk? I glanced at my assistant, who was hovering in the doorway, looking uncertain. It's okay, Jennifer. Close the door behind you. Tessa sat down in the chair across from my desk, and for a moment we just looked at each other. I tried to find some trace of the woman I'd married, but she seemed like a stranger. I heard about your business, she said finally. It's doing well. It is. I'm glad. You deserve success. I waited for the other shoe to drop. Tessa never gave compliments without an agenda. I came to apologize, she said, and I felt my eyebrows rise in surprise. I know it doesn't mean anything now, and I know it doesn't fix what I did, but I needed to say it. Okay, I destroyed our marriage. I destroyed your trust, your life, everything we built together. And I did it for money and excitement, and because I thought I deserved more than what we had. She was crying now, tears running down her cheeks without makeup to hide behind. I convinced myself that you were holding me back, that you didn't understand my potential. But the truth is, I was just selfish and stupid, and I threw away the best thing in my life for a fantasy. I sat there listening, trying to figure out how I felt. A year ago, this conversation would have destroyed me. 6 months ago, it would have made me angry. Now, I mostly felt sad. I'm not asking for forgiveness, she continued. I know I don't deserve it. I'm not asking for another chance because I know that's impossible. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I lost, and I'm sorry. She stood up, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I also wanted you to know that I'm getting help. Therapy, group counseling, all of it. I'm trying to figure out how to be a better person. That's good, I said, and I meant it. I hope it works out for you. She nodded and walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. Danny, are you happy? I thought about it. Was I happy? I was successful, financially stable, doing work that mattered. I had good friends, including Viv, who'd become one of the most important people in my life. I was free from the constant anxiety of wondering what Tessa was really doing, who she was really with, what she was really thinking. Yeah, I said. I think I am. She smiled, and for just a moment, I caught a glimpse of the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. Good. You deserve to be happy. After she left, I sat in my office for a long time, thinking about the conversation. There had been a time when I would have given anything to hear those words from her. Now, they felt like closure on a chapter of my life that I'd already finished reading. My phone buzzed with a text from Viv. Dinner tonight? I have news. I texted back, sure, good news or bad news? Good news, very good news. We met at the same dive bar where we'd celebrated Tessa's sentencing, but this time, Viv was practically glowing with excitement. Okay, I said as soon as I sat down. What's the news? I got the job, she said, grinning. Senior investigator with the Attorney General's office, white-collar crime division. Viv, that's fantastic. I reached across the table and grabbed her hand. When do you start? 2 weeks. And Danny, they want to work with your firm on some cases? Apparently, your reputation is spreading. We talked about her new job, my growing business, and the various cases we were both working on. It felt good to share professional success with someone who understood the work, who appreciated the satisfaction of catching the bad guys. As the evening wound down, I found myself studying Viv's face in the dim bar light. She'd always been beautiful, but there was something different about her now. Confidence, maybe. Or just the satisfaction of knowing she'd done the right thing, even when it was hard. What are you thinking about? She asked, catching me staring. Just this whole thing. How it all worked out. A year ago, I thought my life was falling apart, and now, I think maybe it was just getting started. She smiled, and I felt something shift between us. Something that had been building for months, but that neither of us had been ready to acknowledge. Danny, she said softly, can I ask you something? Of course. That night at the gala, when I said I was taking you, I wasn't just trying to help you get back at Tessa. My heart started beating faster. No? No, I meant it. I've been in love with you for years, but you were married to my sister, and I thought I'd just have to live with that. I stared at her, processing this revelation. Years? Since before you and Tessa got engaged. But you were so happy with her, or you seemed to be, and I wouldn't have done anything to interfere with that. Even though you knew what she was really like? Especially because I knew what she was really like. I knew she'd find a way to destroy it eventually, and I thought maybe Maybe when that happened, you'd be ready to see me. I reached across the table and took both of her hands in mine. Viv, you don't have to say anything, she said quickly. I know this is complicated, and I know the timing is weird, and I don't want you to feel pressured. I leaned across the table and kissed her, cutting off her nervous rambling. She tasted like beer and possibility, and when we broke apart, she was smiling. So, she said, was that a yes? That was definitely a yes. We left the bar together, walking slowly through the Chicago streets, talking about everything and nothing. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. 6 months later, Viv moved in with me. A year after that, I proposed. We got married in a small ceremony with just our closest friends. No charity galas or society photographers. Mrs. Romer officiated, having gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion. Tessa sent a card congratulating us, which I thought was big of her. She'd gotten a job working for a nonprofit in Milwaukee, doing legitimate fundraising work under careful supervision. According to mutual friends, she was doing well, staying clean, and seemed genuinely committed to making amends for what she'd done. Greg, on the other hand, had served his time and immediately tried to start another charity, which was shut down by the state attorney general's office before it could get off the ground. Some people never learn. As for me, I learned that sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you turns out to be the best thing. Tessa's betrayal had hurt like hell, but it had also freed me to become the person I was meant to be. It had shown me what real love looked like, what real partnership felt like. Standing in my office 5 years later, looking at the wall of commendations from law enforcement agencies and thank you letters from the charities I'd helped protect, I realized that Tessa had been right about one thing. I did deserve more than what we'd had. I deserved honesty. I deserved respect. I deserved a partner who saw my success as something to celebrate, not something to resent. I deserved Viv. And as she walked into my office that afternoon, pregnant with our first child and glowing with happiness, I knew that sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes the best revenge is getting everything you ever wanted.